You stand on the uneven stones of the Roman Forum, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of feet, carts, and the endless grinding of time. Dawn has not yet fully committed to the day. A pale, reluctant light filters between the roofs of the basilicas and temples, stretching in narrow bands across the square. The air is damp and faintly metallic, carrying the smell of wet limestone and extinguished oil lamps. It is the kind of morning in which sound carries strangely, where a single cough or the scrape of leather sandals on stone can seem to come from everywhere at once. Around you, the forum is still half asleep. The colonnades are wrapped in shadow, and the high facades of public buildings are dull with the residue of night moisture. Somewhere, a torch guttering in a wall sconce sends up a slow, ribboning smoke, its orange glow a small, stubborn defiance against the incoming daylight. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the chill of the stone seep through the soles of your sandals, and glance toward the gathering figures of the elders. They are not many, just enough to mark the day as unusual. Their movements are deliberate, unhurried, as though the passage of hours belongs to them entirely. They do not speak at once. When voices do rise, they are low, each syllable drawn out as if weighed before release. You recognize the cadence of the Latin tongue, formal and measured, yet so muffled by distance that the words themselves are beyond your reach. It is not a conversation meant for you, not yet. It is a rehearsal for something that will, in time, become law, etched in metal, set in public, and made part of the city's very skeleton. A clerk, younger than the rest, fumbles with a wax tablet, the polished surface catching a thin blade of sunlight. He presses the stylus to the wax, and the faint scratching sound is swallowed by the vastness of the square. A priest passes along the far edge of the forum, his white bordered toga brushing the stone, carrying a bundle of laurel branches that whisper faintly against one another. The smell of crushed leaves follows him for a moment, then fades into the heavy air. The elders cluster near the shadow of the rostra, the speaker's platform that juts like a prow into the open. Its bronze fittings are dulled to a greenish sheen, the patina of seasons uncounted. Here, the shape of the gathering becomes clearer, an arc of men leaning slightly inward, their heads close, their bodies blocking the weak light. One lifts his hand, palm outward, in a small gesture that still commands attention. A pause settles in, deeper than before, until it seems the square itself is listening. You let your eyes wander to the temples at the edge of the forum, the Temple of Saturn, its columns thick and unyielding, the Temple of Castor and Pollux, its trio of Corinthian columns standing like the last teeth of a broken jaw. These buildings have already outlived more than one generation, and they will likely outlast you. Their stones do not hurry. Their shadows shift in long, slow arcs as the earth turns. Somewhere behind you, a cartwheel bumps over a loose flagstone, the sound abrupt in the hush. The driver mutters to himself, the words blurred by the distance, and the mule's hooves clop irregularly before fading away. You realize how empty the forum still is, how much space exists between each figure here, and how the emptiness itself feels deliberate, as though the day must begin with this wide breathing room before anything of weight can be said. The sun gains a little more ground. A gilded edge appears on the Capitolium's highest stones. A pigeon shifts its perch on the entablature of the Basilica Aemilia, its feathers rustling dryly, before launching into the morning air with a slow, labored beat of wings. Your gaze returns to the elders, who now form a more complete circle. A scroll is unrolled, its edges cracked and curling from age. One of them holds it in both hands, the parchment trembling slightly, not from uncertainty, but from the subtle tremor of age. You cannot hear the words. You can only see the lips move, see the slight nods, the tightening of eyes, the way one man's fingers drum lightly against the scroll's wooden rod. They are building something here, though it is not yet visible. The language is theirs, but the weight will be yours as well, in ways that will become clear only much later. A breeze stirs the earth at last, cool and damp, sliding between the columns and across the open square. It carries the faint scent of the Tiber, the distant splash of water against stone embankments. The elders do not seem to notice. They are anchored to the moment, as if by invisible chains, rooted in the slow ritual of creating what has never been written before. The morning, too, seems reluctant to move forward, as though it senses that these hours will be heavier than most. And so you stand, your breath quiet, your steps stilled, waiting for something that will begin without any visible signal, waiting for the first laws of Rome to be given shape in the shadows before the day is truly born. You follow them through the narrow streets that lead from the Forum toward the Curia, the Senate House. The paving stones here are darker, still wet from the dew, and they hold the memory of countless feet moving through centuries of similar mornings. The air shifts subtly as you pass beneath the archway, from the open coolness of the square into something heavier, enclosed, almost stale. Inside, the walls rise high and close, lined with stone that swallows sound and holds the faint tang of old incense, smoke, and dry dust. The great wooden doors shut behind you with a slow, final groan, their iron hinges announcing the weight they bear. The sound hangs in the dim chamber for a long moment, as though even it is reluctant to fade. Rows of benches curve around the center, each polished smooth where generations of elbows have rested, where togas have brushed and settled. Light comes in sparingly, in narrow columns, from small openings high above, illuminating drifting motes of dust that turn lazily in the air. The elders take their places without hurry. Some lean back into the shadows, their features half lost in the gloom. Others sit forward, resting hands on knees, watching the scrolls and tablets that begin to appear. A scribe moves among them with slow, deliberate steps, carrying a bundle of documents bound with leather thongs. The parchment edges are frayed and curling, the ink on some already faded to a ghost of brown. The talk begins quietly, each voice finding its way into the space with care, as if probing the chamber's mood before daring to rise. The Latin is formal here, the syllables clipped and deliberate, the tone like that of men accustomed to having their words recorded and weighed. The first topics are not yet the laws themselves, but the principles, what should be considered sacred, what punishments must be fixed, what obligations citizens should bear toward the state and toward one another. It is not long before the disagreements surface. One man, draped in the whitened folds of a senator's toga, speaks with sharp precision about property, how it must be protected, how boundaries must be honored, as if they were the skin of the city itself. Another responds, his voice slower, heavier, warning that too much rigidity will stifle trade and choke the city's growth. Between them, the air thickens. Words are not shouted, they are honed and released like thrown blades, and you feel their edges even without understanding every detail. The subject turns toward crime, murder, theft, treason. The punishments are named in cold sequence: fines, exile, death. The words are flat, without flourish, and that absence makes them heavier. One elder mentions public execution, how the sight itself would serve as warning. Another frowns, speaking of the dignity of the republic, how blood spilled in the streets would stain more than stone. The argument stretches out, and in the silence between replies, you hear the faint tapping of a stylus against a tablet, a rhythm that betrays impatience. A senator in the far row speaks next, his voice cracked with age, yet strong enough to carry across the chamber. He speaks of the need to protect the poor, to keep the laws from becoming weapons for the wealthy. The others listen without interruption, though their stillness feels less like agreement and more like the patience one grants to an old friend. When he finishes, the silence holds for a long moment, broken only by the shifting of feet and the creak of a bench under shifting weight. You notice how the light in the chamber changes as the morning deepens. The pale beams from above lengthen, sliding across the floor, catching the edges of sandals, the hem of a toga, the curved handle of a scroll. Outside, somewhere beyond the heavy doors, the city has begun to stir. Vendors setting up stalls, hammers striking against wood, the dull roar of many voices blending together. In here, time moves differently. Every moment feels slowed, thickened, as though the air itself has weight. The debate circles back to property, now with sharper edges. The words land and inheritance recur like the steady beat of a drum. You realize that these laws, when they are finally set in bronze, will not be abstract. They will define who may keep what, who may take, and who must give. They will decide not only the living arrangements of the city, but the shape of its future disputes. One senator rises from his seat, stepping into the center. His toga's folds fall heavily, and his hand grips the end of a scroll so tightly the knuckles whiten. He speaks of the 12 tribes, of ancient customs, of oaths sworn to gods, whose temples still crown the hills. He warns that to abandon tradition is to invite chaos, that to write new laws is to cut the threads that hold the city's order together. His words echo faintly in the high space, and for a moment, the dust and the beams of sunlight seems to hang motionless. At last, the presiding magistrate speaks, his tone low but final. The discussions will continue, but the foundations must be agreed upon before the details can be carved in metal. His words settle into the chamber like fine sand, finding every corner and crevice, marking an end to this part of the day. The benches creak again as men rise, stretching stiff limbs, rolling up scrolls, handing them back to the waiting scribe. The great doors open with the same slow weight, letting in a wash of warm air and the muted noise of the city outside. You step into the light with them, blinking as your eyes adjust. Behind you, the chamber swallows the last footsteps, its cool shadows already reclaiming the silence. Ahead lies the work of making their decisions permanent, fixed not just in word but in bronze. You enter the workshop by its narrow door, ducking beneath a lintel darkened by the breath of many small fires. Inside, the air is thicker than the Senate's hush, a compound of metal filings, cooling water, and the animal scent of heated leather. The space is long and low, its rafters stitched with soot. A brazier glows in the corner like a buried ember, bright at the core and ruddy at the edges, giving off a steady whisper that you feel more than hear. The walls are hung with tools whose names are not given to you, though their purposes declare themselves in the shapes of their iron mouths. Chisels of many widths, punches tipped like stars, burins sharpened to unkind points. A table stands beneath a slit window. On it lie the bronze tablets that will receive the city's words. They are neither large nor grand, but they are patient. Their surfaces have been filed smooth until they hold a dull reflection, the color of old honey. If you lean close, you can see your face melt and gather again, as if the metal were a shallow pool troubled by an unseen wind. Alongside the tablets, a bowl of blackened oil sits with a film that glistens like a night pond, and a bundle of cloth turns slowly around the idea of being clean. The scribes do not announce themselves, they are present as function, not spectacle. One bends over a tablet, supported by a wooden block, the angle of his back the geometry of concentration. He tests his burin against a strip of softer metal, a scraping sound like a whisper made visible, and then brings the tip down onto the bronze. The first stroke is shallow, more a decision than a mark. The second begins to bite. Soon the line is a groove, and you feel the pressure of it in your teeth, that subtle ache a body learns from long listening to hard work. What the Senate spoke in smoke and dust is being translated into the language of scratches and troughs. A clerk at the far end of the room reads in a low monotone from a wax tablet. The words are spaced as carefully as footsteps on ice. He pauses between clauses as if he is lifting and setting down weight. The burin follows, a blunt-nosed pilgrim on a pilgrimage of letters, carving toward clarity as the day thickens. You think of how a thought becomes a sound, and a sound becomes a rule, and a rule becomes a wound in metal that no hand may heal without leaving another scar. The first tablet fills with tidy channels. The letters are not handsome, they are durable. The bronze shines faintly at each cut, a brief brightness that dulls as the burin moves on, leaving behind a line that drinks light rather than reflects it. The scribe leans back, flexes his fingers, and rubs his hand with oil that smells of crushed olives and iron. He blots the tablet with cloth and lifts it so the window's thin light can fall across the text. The letters survive the test, steep and legible. They will not flee under a wet thumb. They will not fade in a drawer. They are now part of the city's furniture. Other tablets wait, lined like soldiers who have not yet been called to move. Their emptiness is not peaceful. It is a tension that gathers with every completed line, with every clause that becomes an incision. The clerk turns the wax to the next passage. The words involve property again, boundaries, the lines between fields, and the small wars that bloom where lines are uncertain. The scribe grinds his teeth softly, sets the burin to the bronze, and makes the law a physical thing. Heat blooms and recedes. The brazier gives a small hiss when a coil of scrap metal is fed to it. Water in a jar croaks against the rim when the table vibrates. A second scribe takes up another tablet and works more slowly, pausing often to breathe on the surface and wipe away whatever grit might mislead his hand. It is not reverence you witness exactly. It is the careful bleakness of men who know that a crooked letter is not a mistake, but a misfortune that multiplies itself down generations. Outside the narrow window, the day figures itself out in bands of brightness, then cloud, then brightness again. The city's noise is a far, continuous animal that occasionally speaks a distinct word, a hammer's single remark, a hawker's call dragged thin by distance, a burst of laughter that arrives already half dead. In here, time is set by the rhythm of engraving. You measure hours in the number of times a scribe straightens his back, in the number of oil dips, in the slow raising and lowering of a lamp's wick. You remember the first meetings, those dry debates where men tested one another's patience, as if testing the planks of a raft. Here, in this room, their arguments have become edges and depths. The law that protects a neighbor's boundary now has thickness. The law that demands compensation has hardness. The law that speaks of penalties has weight that you could, in a certain mood, place on a scale. You feel a strange reluctance to touch the finished tablets, as though they are still cooling and would burn you, not with heat, but with their finality. A boy brings bread wrapped in cloth, its crust dusty with flour, and a skin of watered wine, whose neck has been bleached by many hands. The scribes do not stop exactly. They stagger their pauses so that the room is never without the sound of cutting. The boy lingers a moment, peering at the letters with an expression that might be curiosity or dread. He might one day come to this wall of text for an answer about debt, perhaps, or marriage, or the small crimes that grow where need and habit meet. He leaves without speaking, and the door's shadow writes itself briefly across the nearest tablet before the light fetches itself back. The clerk reads a passage that concerns testimony. How many witnesses are sufficient? What happens when oaths fall apart under the pressure of convenience? The words feel brittle, as if they might snap in the air. The scribe does not look up. He shakes his hand as if to loosen a stubborn thought from his fingers, then scores another letter with the patience of a man pushing a plow across stony ground. The thought of witnesses pushes you back into memory, faces at the edge of a crowd, heads turned, mouths set, each person deciding what to remember and what to forget. The law tries to instruct memory, the metal tries to instruct the law. By mid afternoon, the room is burdened with the day's accumulation of filings. A soft drift of bronze dust settles along the table's edge like pale pollen. When the scribe wipes his palm, it glows faintly. He leaves fingerprints on the cloth that look like brief galaxies. You imagine the filings entering someone's lungs, small seeds of permanence lodging in a body that is anything but permanent. Not everything that is written endures. Not everyone who writes endures either. A visitor in a dark bordered toga arrives with a small retinue and the smell of outdoor air. He does not sit. He stands behind the working scribe and reads silently, the tendons in his neck tightening and relaxing as his eyes move. He makes no corrections, though his hand hovers once as if to point before falling to his side. Perhaps he is here to confirm that what was agreed is what is written, that no lone word has slipped in like a weed among stones. He leaves with a nod that is not approval or dismissal, merely acknowledgement that the work is occurring and must continue. When the first set of tablets is complete, they are laid out in a line on a low shelf, their faces angled to drink the light. The clerk reads them aloud, one by one, his voice thin with fatigue. He stumbles once, recovers, and begins the sentence again. The scribe who cut the line does not look offended. He seems almost grateful to hear the words in air, relieved that they can move after being locked so long inside metal. Then the tablets are rubbed with oil one last time, the excess lifted with a square of wool. The letters deepen, a forest of narrow shadows. You know, without anyone saying it, that they will be given to the forum soon, to stand in open weather with the stubborn posture of things that outlast their uses. Evening inches toward the door frame, the rectangle of daylight dimming, the brazier now the room's true sun. The work does not end because the day ends. It ends because a line is reached beyond which clarity thins into error. The tools are set back onto their pegs. The tablets are covered with cloth. The clerk folds the wax tablet closed like a lid on a slow jar. A faint ringing hum lives in your ears, the afterimage of metal upon metal, as if the room continues to engrave itself upon you even when the Burens sleep. When you step outside, the city's sky has turned the color of cooled ash. The stones hold the day's warmth for your feet, and the smell of cooking drifts like a benign fog between doorways. Behind you, beyond the narrow door, the words wait, not yet public, not yet exposed to the hands and eyes that will test them. In the slow dusk, you imagine the bronze dreaming of the square, dreaming of columns and long shadows, dreaming of the voices that will someday read its cuts aloud to those who can hear and those who cannot. You walk back toward the forum with an odd calm that is not comfort. Somewhere in the loom of streets, a dog barks twice, and a woman's jar taps against her hip in a rhythm that might be counted if numbers were welcome tonight. You count instead by breaths, by steps, by the repetitions of thought. Law is an arrangement of lines. Life is an arrangement of lines that refuses to hold still. Between them stands the metal, stubborn and unsleeping, waiting to be set in place where anyone may consult it and find, if not mercy, at least a shape to push against. Tomorrow, the tablets will meet the light. Tomorrow, what has been scratched into bronze will be regarded by faces that hardly register as individuals when seen from a column's shadow. Tomorrow, you will watch the city trying on its new sentences like armor that fits and chafes at the same time. For now, the night draws its own rules across the roofs and courtyards, unwritten and therefore easy. You follow the slow slope of the street down into the square where the stones know your steps, and you let your gaze rest on the empty places where the laws will stand. The morning begins with a light sharper than the day before, the kind that cuts shadow into clean edges along the forum's stones. You are already there when the first of the workmen arrive, their movements measured, their shoulders leaning under the weight of the bronze tablets. Each tablet is carried by two men, the metal swaying slightly between them like a loaded stretcher. The cloths that covered them are pulled away and folded into neat, anonymous squares, leaving the raw surface to drink the sun. The place chosen for their display is not far from the rostra. Two tall stone uprights have been prepared to receive the mounting beams, their pale faces rough where chisels have worked. The smell of fresh cut stone lingers, sharp and powdery, mixing with the faint tang of bronze that has been handled too long. You can hear the creak of rope as the tablets are hoisted and fitted, the dull thump of a mallet persuading iron pins into place. No one hurries. This is not the work of a market stall or a merchant's tally. This is something meant to appear as though it has always been here, even on its first day. As the sun climbs, the bronze wakes into a brightness that makes you squint. The incised letters, which in the workshop were quiet shadows, now glint like water disturbed by wind. From certain angles, they are almost unreadable, the glare erasing their shape. From others, the grooves are as deep and dark as narrow wells. The men adjust their positions, checking each line against the next, making certain that the text is level, that no word seems to tip forward or retreat. A crooked sentence here would be more than an error, it would be an omen. The city has begun to notice. From the edges of the forum, small knots of people draw closer. Most do not speak. Their sandals scuff the stones, and their shadows fall across the lower parts of the tablets, making temporary masks for the words. A child points, his hand lingering in the air until his mother lowers it gently. An older man leans in, his eyes narrowing, not because he cannot read, but because he wishes to test the truth of what is there against the rumors he has heard. The bronze, indifferent, gives him each letter without apology. You step back to take in the scene. The rostra looms behind the display, its carved prows and green patinated fittings looking on like silent witnesses. To the left, the columns of the Basilica Aemilia send their shadows in long diagonal bands across the open square. A vendor, passing with a tray of figs balanced on his shoulder, slows and tilts his head toward the tablets before moving on, his footsteps fading into the hum of the city. A crier approaches, his voice already warmed by repetition. He does not read the laws in their entirety. Few could stand so long in the sun without shifting, but he selects certain clauses, letting the words fall in careful measure. Around him, heads turn slightly to catch the sound, like flowers turning to the path of light. His voice is not dramatic. It is the voice of one who carries messages without ownership, a conduit for the Senate's decisions. The words reach your ears as both familiar and strange. You have seen them take shape in the workshop, but spoken aloud they carry a different weight, one that presses itself into the body. The crowd is not large, but it is steady. People come and go, leaving in their wake the faint scent of wool warmed by the sun, of dust shaken from the hem of a garment. Now and then someone traces the air near a line of text, not quite touching the metal, as if to feel its presence without breaking the invisible rule of distance. A few murmur to one another, their tones more observational than disputatious. The bronze does not invite argument, it invites endurance. As the day lengthens, the light changes its approach. The glare softens, and the grooves in the letters grow darker, more legible. You find yourself reading certain passages again and again, noting where the Senate's precision becomes almost cruelty, where mercy is framed by conditions so narrow it hardly deserves the name. The clauses about debt are particularly sharp. They speak of pledges, of the holding of persons as surety, of the sale of the debtor into servitude beyond the city's boundaries. In the shadow of the rostra, such sentences seem to deepen the shade. A wind rises in the early afternoon, sliding between the columns and setting the edges of the tablets humming faintly, like a distant swarm of bees. The sound is not unpleasant, but it reminds you that these laws will not always stand unchallenged. Bronze is stubborn, not eternal. Still, in this moment, it feels as though nothing could move them. Toward the end of this day, the crowd thins. Merchants return to their stalls. Children are called away by voices from unseen doorways. The crier's tone loses some of its firmness, and he pauses more often, letting the gaps between readings stretch. The sun, now leaning toward the western hills, gives the bronze a coppery glow. The letters look as if they are sinking into the surface, bedding themselves in for the night. You remain where you are as the workers return to check the fastenings. They press against the pins, test the stability of the beams, and step back with small nods. The tablets are left uncovered, their faces turned toward the open square, as if they can watch over it. The air cools, carrying the smell of cooking fires from the lower streets. Shadows gather in the joints of the stones, deepening until the words on the bronze are swallowed into darkness. When the torches are lit along the forum's edge, their flames lick at the air, but fail to catch the letters fully. The light is too warm, the bronze too dark now. You imagine someone approaching in the night to read, finding instead only the shapes of sentences without meaning, outlines without fill. Perhaps this is fitting. Not every truth is meant to be known in the same light. As the last of the crowd departs, You take one more slow walk past the tablets. Your own reflection follows you, stretched and broken across the uneven plains. You think of the Senate's debates, of the workshop's steady cutting, of the weight in the arms of the men who carried the metal here. All of it converges in these silent panels that will not move until someone stronger than the present moment decides otherwise. The forum exhales as the night comes fully. The stones cool under your feet. The bronze stands still, neither inviting nor rejecting the gaze of whoever might pass. Somewhere beyond the square, a dog barks twice and is answered by another. The sound fades, and the quiet takes its place, as though it too has been written into the day's final order. You do not leave the forum when the others do. The air has cooled enough that the warmth of the stone beneath your feet is only a memory, and the sky has settled into a color somewhere between smoke and ink. The bronze tablets stand in their places without any sense of having been placed there. In the dimness, they seem older than the walls behind them, as if they had always been part of the city, waiting only for the right day to reveal themselves. A torch has been fixed to a nearby column, its flame moving in small, quick gestures. The light is too narrow to claim more than a corner of the nearest tablet, leaving the rest in a deliberate kind of obscurity. You approach, hearing your own steps amplified by the emptiness of the square. Each footfall sets loose a faint echo that returns to you half a heartbeat later, the forum speaking back in its own quiet way. The bronze smells faintly metallic, and the air between you and it is warm from the torch, as if the law itself emits a small, steady heat. You read what you can in the shifting glow. The letters catch the light for an instant, then surrender it to the next flicker. A clause about boundaries passes before your eyes, followed by a list of penalties for those who cross them without right. The words have the rhythm of something older than the city, as though the Senate had only uncovered them rather than created them. You step sideways, tracing the text down to the next line, and feel the unevenness of the ground beneath your sandals. The forum's stones are old enough to have their own geography, small rises and hollows worn in patterns that match no map. Behind you, the wind turns a corner and arrives in the square with a slow insistence. It moves the torchlight in waves, making the shadows on the bronze shift like deep water. The words do not change, but their appearance does, sometimes sharper, sometimes dissolving into darkness. You realize that these laws, now public, will live in many lights: morning glare, noon shadow, the softened gold of evening, the occasional moon's silver. Their meaning will remain, but their presence will alter with each hour, like a stone seen through shifting depths. You step back until the tablets are once again a single panel, the individual letters too small to distinguish. In this form, the laws are not about words, but about posture. They stand without bending, without leaning, without suggestion of movement. You think of how they were argued over in the Senate's gloom, how they were cut into metal in a workshop smelling of oil and filings, how they were carried into the sunlight by men whose backs bent under their weight. Now, all that labor is invisible. Only the result remains, the surface that hides the work. The square itself is not entirely still. A pair of figures passes along the far colonnade, their voices low enough to be mistaken for the wind. Somewhere unseen, a pot is set down on stone with a hollow note, followed by the sound of water being poured. The city has folded itself inward for the night, but its movements still press faintly against the forum's edges. You stand apart from them, in the small circle of space where the tablets hold the air like a sealed jar. It occurs to you that the laws will never again be unwritten. Even if the bronze were melted or broken, the sentences have already entered the memory of those who have read them. They will be carried away in fragments, repeated in different voices, bent slightly to fit the needs of each teller. The version in front of you is the fixed one, but it is already a source for countless others that will contradict and confirm it in equal measure. The permanence is not in the metal alone. It is in the minds that will take the metal's shape into themselves. The torch nearest you gutters, recovering with a sharp snap. Its light flares briefly, catching the upper edge of the tablet and throwing a narrow blade of brightness across the letters. For a moment, they seem to glow from within, as if the law were lit by its own certainty. Then the flame steadies, and the words return to their quiet. The moment leaves you with a sense of something both final and fragile, as though permanence were not a single state, but a task that must be renewed with every day the tablets stand. You turn away and walk toward the center of the forum. The open space breathes differently here, away from the vertical faces of the columns. Above, the sky is pulling its last colors into darkness. A single star shows, pale against the deeper blue, and the smell of cooling stone rises like a slow tide. The rostra is an unmoving shadow now, its bronze fittings invisible in the dark, its prows reduced to shapes without detail. As you pass the edge of the square, you look back. The tablets are only faintly visible, their presence more an interruption of the darkness than a thing in themselves. You imagine them as they will be seen tomorrow, their surfaces heating under the sun, the letters hard and deep, the words carrying whatever authority the city has agreed to give them. You imagine them in 10 years, when some clauses will seem outdated, when others will have been tested and found wanting. You imagine them in 100 years, when the bronze will be weathered, the edges softened, the words still legible but no longer entirely the same as when they were first cut. The thought is neither comfort nor warning. It is simply the recognition that the day has added something to the city that will remain here long after you have gone. You feel the weight of that knowledge in your shoulders, as if you too had carried the bronze. The wind passes again through the square, lifting the corner of your cloak, brushing against your cheek with a coolness that smells faintly of the river. It moves on, leaving you alone with the last light. You begin the walk home, your steps echoing once, twice, then fading into the softer ground beyond the forum's edge. The streets narrow, the shadows deepen, and the sound of your sandals on stone becomes the only certain thing in the world. Behind you, the tablets stand in their new place, holding the silence, waiting for the morning when they will once again catch the first light and show their sentences to whoever comes to look.